I'm glad to be joined by May for another FinTech Surge Advanced Team conversation. May's the Chief Data Officer of Gulf Bank, and she's joining us here from Kuwait. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Oscar. I'm glad to be here.
So I understand that you have a career spanning across industries and across continents in the United States, in Kuwait, e-commerce, airlines, and now you are the Chief Data Officer in a bank. And look forward to our conversation today to hear about your journey and how you see your job and your role being different in a bank and how it is evolving, what it means to be a Chief Data Officer.
Yeah, Chief Data Officer kind of spans over all my experience. I've always joked that I've kind of went through all this experience to be in this position. Yes, I started my career in banking about 17 years ago and here in Kuwait. And I spent around 7 years between different banks. And then I've had 10 years in the United States where I worked closely with Google partners and implementing Google Analytics solutions, data cloud, all of the fun stuff that Google does with data.
Yeah.
And now I'm back in Kuwait at Gulf Bank, and it's a pleasure because I've seen kind of what we can do with data with Google, and worked closely with retailers in the past 10 years. And retailers are always way ahead because they want to capitalize on the data. They want to use it to sell more and get more. And I think with the digital transformations that most banks are going through in the region, that value of data is being realized more and more by banks. Before it was more about what information they knew. Now it's all about what we can know and what we can use the data to get more, and how we can actually monetize the data, which is something that digital transformation will help the banks achieve in no time if you have the right people and the right tools.
So what is the data that you try to mine and make sense of? And how do you get it out to the right people that need the data within the organization?
The data, I mean, for banks, it's sometimes I used to say e-commerce has an advantage because e-commerce, you know, they know what type of products you buy. They have a little account for you. Like if you think, for example, Amazon, they see you on your app, browsing the Amazon app, and they go into the website. But now that I'm in the bank and I'm looking at the data, I think also banks have an advantage, just like e-commerce, because they do have a customer profile. Once you have the demographics of the customer, where he lives, his age, all of that stuff, that is part of the profile. But more than that, banks know where you shop, what you know, how much you earn, and all of that stuff. That all build a persona for that customer. And then all these personas that you build for your different customers, you can definitely mine that data with artificial intelligence tool to come up with more insights, but mainly to cater for that customer for what they need. You're not going to offer him products or her a product that doesn't match their spending behavior, that doesn't match how much they earn or how much they travel, because you can even see their transaction if they're local or traveling a lot. All of that stuff you create models to create that persona of the customer, and then you can serve them better as a bank.
And do you think that it still has a long way to go to become better, or do you think it's as good as it's going to be at the moment with the tools that you have?
You know, there is never a long way with when it comes to data and banks, because things change every day. Things that I was doing 2 years ago are now obsolete almost. So yeah, we're always playing catch up sometimes with the tools. And it's nice because it keeps us on our toes, but also the customer expectations becomes higher because they know they can, you know, get all of that stuff, because now all customers are kind of tech savvy. They expect you to have top-notch app to tell them exactly what they need, or favorite something if they use it a lot or something like that. So it's best for us to kind of just keep up with the trends, but it's also great that our customers kind of keep up on our toes because they know what we can offer, what we can do, and they just, the world being so flat that they see everything else, where there's not something that is region specific or technology in certain regions. Everybody knows everything right now, and it's interesting how much things are unfolding with data.
So how can a bank be more competitive by having the best chief data officer?
Well, it's sometimes you got to think outside the box and not just put yourself into the banking. That's when like a chief data officer works with all users or all units in the bank, whether it's wholesale banking or retail banking, or if it's just like talking in branches or things like that. Everything is connected by data, because every single system or every single process in the bank either creates data or consumes data. So one way or another, you're using data. And when you have a data practice in the bank run by the data office or a data officer, this is when you actually work with this data to make it work for you and for your customer, to make sure that if this customer has a certain behavior, then you can actually not wait for them to come and ask for something. You would offer them before they ask, like answer their questions before they even ask them.
Yeah, so I mean, it's quite uncanny when Google picks up on what you're looking for before you even type it in the search bar. But no offense to the banking industry, I get surprised at how bad they predict my needs. And when I'm talking to them, or you call the data center, you call the customer service, or they call you, and it's like, don't you know me? Can't you see who I am? Why would I want some sort of a loan when you look at my history and so forth? And I'm wondering, like, I'm assuming that there are privacy limitations as to allowing everyone to know your history and so forth. What barriers do you see in making use of the data?
Yeah, I mean, so when Google anticipates everything you say, because that's their business, their core business is data, their core business is knowing you. Versus banking, their core business is banking, to offer you like certain credit cards, loans, the different type of accounts and all of that. So banks have been so focused on their core business, which is banking and products, and making you better served in their branches, up until this digital transformation era hit, and now their focus has to be split between their core business and then doing that digital transformation and helping everything becomes kind of data centered or oriented. Of course, when I came from the e-commerce world, I had a bit of a culture shock here in my first month because of all of the kind of the policy and privacy regulations that banks have to go with. And we're coming from Google, where everything is data is for sharing and usage. Banks do have a challenge, honestly, with all the privacy regulations, and some of these privacy regulations are now even restricting e-commerce websites and other websites where you're not allowed to track anything unless you get consent and all of that stuff. Now the banks have already had that before e-commerce now are pretty mad at all of these regulators, but banks had that in practice or always there. And honestly, they are playing catch up with e-commerce. If you talk about banks in general, even like e-commerce companies had chief data officers and data offices set more than 10, 12 years ago. And now banks are slowly catching up to that trend. And like I mentioned, when you're in e-commerce, you start with data, you start with that, and that's your core business. But when you're a bank, your core business is that branch, and that's where the main focus is. But now we have neobanks coming and all of that stuff. So the whole business is changing. And that's where I think banks have, and probably with COVID, the pressure is even higher with the digital transformation. So before it was, we need to have a digital transformation in 5 to 10 years. And now we need to have that digital transformation yesterday. So everyone is really playing catch up with it. And some of it is good and some of it is just tough on the banks, honestly.
And an interesting trend I'm seeing is how banks are partnering up with e-commerce. Here in Dubai, we have noon.com. They have an interesting collaboration with Mashreq Bank and also with Kareem. I mean, they seem to have a lot of data that is tracked to the geolocation, And is
Nice.
that a trend you're seeing? I mean, not just being able to track where the people are and the
Mhm.
consumer patterns, but also biometrics and as well as behavioral analytics to see like when you're moving around, to see when
Mhm.
you might need what you want.
Well, it depends honestly on the bank's strategy and how do they want to position themselves. Because some banks, for them, partnering with an e-commerce became a matter of survival in this day and time because of all the changes, and some businesses just could not survive with the whole pandemic. Some banks just became neobanks or digital banks. Um, but some still rather be the brick and mortar, and where the people and people want to see a face and do that. So some and many other organizations also are taking decisions now to actually say, where do we want to go from here? Do we want to
Yeah.
become like totally digital? Do we want to, stick to our different to the original model, but also have that digital transformation? So it's a choice kind of, but it's still data can help you make that choice with whether you look at your bank and you look at your customers, the region you're in, how much adoption of data, how much adoption of technology, and that helps you make that decision whether can I survive being a brick and mortar? Do I have to become partner with this e-commerce and catch up with everything? Some banks have become payment processors, doing all of that stuff with the e-commerce. It's there is no right answer to that because, like I mentioned, it's very region specific, bank specific, and also data will help you make that decision. And sometimes it's you try and adapt because there's with every business and not just banking, there's always the challenges that come, and that this is what as a business, if you're adaptable, if you're up to change, then it's easy for you to kind of survive but also lead the market and become the leader regardless of change. And if there's anything that COVID taught us is we have to adapt and quickly learn and change and be flexible.
Yeah. I feel like here in the region in the Middle East, there's a very great focus on consumer spending and retail banking. Um, but I suppose that can be a race to the bottom, offering the biggest cash backs, offering the best promotions to take your credit card, whereas the better margins would be on mortgages and business accounts and so forth. How does that affect you when you look at data? I mean, do you have a completely different approach as to the data mining and the analytics?
Definitely. I mean, and I think because of the way business is done here, like some of the when I was in the United States, I've seen how kind of loans is a selling edge for customers, because for banks, because there are different interest rates and things that the banks can offer versus in the region here, some of it is highly regulated in terms of interest rates. So the starting point for them, as you mentioned, is the cash and the spending and credit cards and all of that stuff. And that's music to my ears when I first heard that when I came back to Kuwait, because that means I can really mine the data of the spending and customers. And that data is rich if you track it the right way, if you have the right tagging for it, if you have the right classification and metadata for all of that stuff, it helps you mine it. But the real gold mine is actually mixing the online with the offline data. When someone is actually swiping his card at a store or purchasing something online, that's, to me as a bank, I see it as kind of offline, meaning of a transactions that happens on one of the systems. Online data is when someone comes to my website, someone goes on, the online banking website, all of that stuff. That is the online customer. And for the longest time, they treated the online customer different than the offline customer. The offline customer,
Yeah.
based on his spending, he gets a text message saying, you spent in this store, here's a discount to that store or something. The online customer, he sees an ad based on what he did in the website. But when we marry the two together, this is the real gold mine. That I know what he did online, and then I can mix it for his transaction or his spending behavior over the past year, and then I can offer him something that is definitely will be a good sell, and something that the customer will be interested. So it's just providing that better experience for the customer. This is where the data can help the customer and the bank.
So to finish off our conversation, give us your vision as to how you see your role evolving in the next 5 years.
Well, I have a roadmap for that, and that roadmap is very extensive because, starting a data practice, being a first generation data officer in a bank is a great challenge, honestly, because you get to form something, but at the same time, you really get to work with every business user in the bank. Now, for every business department, a chief data officer is their data partner. And as I mentioned, every business department relies on data, generates reports, do all of that stuff. So they need that data officer to make sure that the data they have is good, is of value. It's something that they can rely on generating the reports. And at the same time, once we ensure that this data is clean, this data is great to use, then we can monetize the data. So that, the role of chief data officer goes at the beginning, you're really just cleansing and governing data and mainly taking the data governance role. But in the long term, once that data governance is established, then you take more of the analytics and monetization. And, there is all of these chief data officer, chief analytics officer, or chief data and analytics officer. So all of these mix of things, and, all of them burn down to data. So as a chief data officer, I see that role goes from data governance, data quality, then to analytics and monetization, and then kind of forming a full enterprise data strategy or enterprise data management overall. But you have to go through the phases in order to reach that gold mine in the end.
Interesting. It's been a pleasure speaking to you. I hope to see you at the FinTech Surge event in October.
Yes, thank you. And I'm hoping to make it to the October event. And it's something that I've been waiting for since I've been away for a while, and now I'm back to Kuwait. So last time I was there, probably, 12 years ago. So I'm looking forward to that again.
Look forward to having you there.
Thank you, Oscar.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.